Today, the next expansion for Destiny 2 called Renegades was revealed, and so I thought it would be kind of interesting to try something new. I've prepared a slideshow, and I'm going to break down everything that we learned today about the story of Renegades from the ViDoc and also the reveal stream. And I've also included some stuff from the new lore that was released with Ash and Iron that kind of gives context to some of the things that we saw in the reveal. Right off the bat, we learned that Renegades actually does not only take place on Mars, like everyone thought, it actually takes place in three different locations. It takes place on Mars, which is the stand in for Tatooine that we saw in the initial reveal trailer. Pretty much everybody expected after we saw that lore entry about Xur getting mugged by the Cabal on Mars. And then we have Venus, which is a Dagobah stand in, so kind of like Empire Strikes Back. Visiting Venus will be really interesting because we haven't actually gone to Venus since Destiny 1, unless you count reprised Vault of Glass. Unless I'm forgetting something. But we haven't seen this planet in a long time, so I'm interested to see what's going on Venus. The next planet is Europa, which is the stand in for Hoth. Ice planet, makes sense. And as you can see here, we've got, I think this is an ATST. And then on Mars, we have Tharsis Junction, which is kind of like, it seems like it's going to be a social hub for the expansion, and it's serving as Mos Eisley or the Mos Eisley Cantina for the expansion. We also saw a little bit of the dungeon. It looked like a few seconds from the opening cutscene or like the starting area. And from the vegetation here, I am pretty sure this takes place on Venus because the expansion is going to Venus. We see this plant life that's not on Europa or Mars, and Venus is very like tropical and jungle like in Destiny. The thing that I feel the most curious about is what's going on in the background here. We've got this like pyramidal architecture, and as far as I'm aware, I don't remember hearing anything about the Black Fleet landing on Venus and installing anything there. I could totally be wrong, but we just haven't really been to Venus, so maybe there's some kind of like secret Black Fleet location on Venus that we're going to. I am still predicting that this is going to be a Shadow Legion dungeon, which, if it's like pyramidal type architecture, that would kind of support that. I am a little bit worried because we just had a whole dungeon that was very pyramidal architecture. I don't want the two dungeons to feel too similar, especially now that we're only getting one per year. I would much rather have a dungeon that feels very like Venus-y than another dungeon that just feels more like pyramid architecture, as we've gotten that kind of architecture in several pieces of content over the last few expansions, and I'm kind of tired of it, to be honest. I would rather see new things. However, I'm totally willing to be proven wrong, as the Raiden Dungeon design team always seems to create like beautiful vistas in their raids and dungeons, so it probably will look fantastic. I'm just a little bit worried about it being too samey to Sunder Doctrine, but could be surprised. We've only seen a couple of seconds of gameplay of this dungeon, so maybe it takes a completely different direction after this like pyramid looking building. I wanted to talk about the weapons. It's the two weapons we already know about. We know about the blaster pistol, which is right here, and the lightsaber, which is right here. I have a slide for each of them. So the lightsaber we now know is called a Praxic Blade. In a lore entry, we hear what presumably is the lightsaber referred to as a cormorant blade, and cormorant is like a like code word that's frequently associated with the Praxic Order and Honor specifically. I'm guessing that is the same thing, so maybe it's called both of them. Maybe they just didn't decide on the name, and some of the lore reflects differently than what they decided on for the Vidoc. Not sure about that, but seems like the same thing. They're both very related to the Praxic Order, which we'll talk about more later. But they did mention that the lightsaber will be customizable. So I'm guessing it's a craftable weapon. It probably is going to have like different things you can change. If they wanted to like really dive into the Star Wars aspect, like being able to customize your hilt and customize your blade color is like a very big deal for like Jedi in Star Wars, and every Star Wars nerd wants to make their own lightsaber. It's a thing. So I'm guessing they lean into that. We also did see in the trailer, we saw both blue and green lightsabers, so maybe it can be blue or green. They could potentially go with the idea of like you can change the elemental affinity, and the color of the lightsaber is dependent on the elemental affinity. So like dark blue would be stasis, orange would be solar, green would be strand, purple would be void, and then I don't know, maybe like light blue or white would be arc. I could totally see them doing something like that, but honestly, we don't have very many details about what you'll be able to do with the lightsaber, but I think it would be super cool if it worked like that. We saw more about the blaster, and it looks kind of like Forerunner, like a special ammo sidearm. And the really interesting thing is the way they talked about it implied that it's a legendary weapon and not an exotic, which if that's true, big lean into the fantasy of Star Wars being able to run both the blaster pistol and the lightsaber at the same time. I could totally see them doing that specifically to enable that fantasy and not make people choose between the two. We don't have a ton of details about like what that looks like either. They just kind of said that it's a legendary weapon, and maybe it's like a type of weapon frame or something. I don't know. It was kind of unclear. So now we're going to talk about more like concrete story details, which is the factions. So the first faction is what is referred to as the Evil Empire in the Renegades timeline entry. They are called the Barant Imperium. I'm not exactly sure what Barant means. I tried to look it up and I couldn't find any like relevant definitions. I did see there's like a term in like Indian law about like property deeds and titles that has the word Barant in it. I have no idea if that's what they're going for, but like if that connection is real, like they see themselves as having dominion or property or control over the entire system, and so they are creating a new imperium or empire to control the system, which makes a lot of sense. They're an imperial empire. That's what imperial empires love to do. They love to colonize a place and do a war and take things over. They're also a new Cabal faction in Cabal Empire. We can see like Skyburner's Oath, but like laserified for Star Wars. And they've got this like white armor that makes them look like stormtroopers. And then I also have a quote from one of the lore entries that tells us more about the Barant Imperium. These Cabal have identified themselves as under the Barant Imperium. Just from my guess, they are former Cabal Ascendancy troops. The guards assigned to me have expressed some nasty opinions on Empress Keitel. They're so damn loud, it's hard to think. Not that I can tell them as such. They answer to someone new. I don't know the name. The Barant Imperium is, like, based on this lore entry, probably a splinter faction who is rebelling from Keitel's Cabal Ascendancy. It'll be interesting to see how that works out, and that explains their origin, but there also are like other Cabal groups that are at large. Urix, who's the Shadow Legion, and Otzot. So I'm interested to see if they're mixed up in this somehow. But it seems like the Barant Imperium is not either of them. And then we have a bunch of factions that are called syndicates, and they are part of the like lawless frontier or the criminal underground on Mars in Tharsis Outpost. So there's 3 different syndicates that will be featured in the expansion. The first is the Pikers. They were described as an atheist biker gang of Elixni who don't worship the Great Machine or any machines. And we learned that they're led by Rilix, which extreme deep cut, but I tried a few different spellings of Rilix. I tried looking it up to find out if Rilix had appeared before, and Rilix does appear as a mini boss in the Warrior Empire Hunt from Beyond Light. So we've met Rilix before, but Rilix has splintered off into this new Piker gang. So I thought that was really funny when I figured that out. So I had to go in game, get a screenshot, and include it. You kind of can't see this because Rilix is being like blasted to hell by the Vex. So our second syndicate is the Totality Division, which is a subset of the Barant Imperium, led by someone who I couldn't tell very well based on the audio. I think they're named Rao, and I'm not sure if the spelling is right. It might be spelled differently. If I was hearing wrong, maybe it's Raul, but I think it's Rao. Because they're like a criminal gang who's like kind of part of the Imperium, but like a little bit distinct from them. I'm guessing that they are the ones who mugged Zur in the lore. Guessing we will find out more about that and why they mugged Zur. And then our final syndicate faction is the one I am the most interested in. It is the Tharsis Reformation. They are individuals from the Nessian Schism Vex, the ones who are commanded by the Echo of Command and the Conductor, Maya Sundaresh. And we have seen in lore in a few different places during the Edge of Fate, Maya Sundaresh, by trying to compel 3 to do something impossible, broke the Echo of Command and now is losing hold over the Nessian Schism Vex. And so some of them are individuating and breaking away from her control. They specifically said in the stream, I thought this was kind of funny, they said that they are wearing clothes and doing crime, 2 things that are essential to learning to being a human. They just look so awkward. It looks like a cat that you put clothes on that really doesn't want to wear those clothes. Huge lore implications here. I'm really curious to see what our like communications and conversations with them are like, because we've never seen Vex like this before. This looks like an Iron Banner pin. I just noticed this in the screenshot. I don't know what that means. Could just be random stuff, unless they stole clothes from Saladin or something. Okay, so our next faction is the Praxic Order, who, as implied by the name Praxic Blade, they are the stand-ins for the Jedi. And we can see someone who is presumably a member of the Praxic Order. We've got some like symbols and crests and stuff here, wielding a lightsaber. It looks white here, but it looks yellow in some of the other shots. I can't really tell. I think it's yellow, but I'm not 100% sure. It might just be white. I believe in this screenshot, this is Honor. We'll get to that later. More info on this. The Praxic Order is standing in for the Jedi because they are the Vanguard and the Last City's equivalent of the Jedi. They are a very dogmatic organization that are focused on protecting humanity from the darkness, and they see the light as good. Like, I have a whole video that I made about the dogma of the Last City and how the Praxic Order, like, they had to accept Ulantan's symmetry with Prismatic and Guardians wielding the darkness. And so I'm really interested to see how the Praxic Order is portrayed in this expansion, because I think the most recent significant lore was in Chirality in the Final Shape. At least that's the most recent one that I remember, aside from some of the Edge of Fate stuff that is clearly tying into this expansion, where Honor was talking about potentially revisiting the Praxic Order's dogma on the darkness, because using the darkness helped us defeat the Witness. However, Honor wanted to keep humanity safe and protect the city before changing the Praxic Order's dogma. And narrative director Allison Lurs did make a comment that made it sound like we are going to be exploring the nature of dogma and like twisting it, because as we know, like philosophically, the Praxic Order's dogma is kind of behind the times because Guardians are wielding both light and dark to fight their enemies now. And also, Honor is totally a cop. In Season of the Drifter, Honor was trying to have the Guardian spy on the Drifter and take down the Drifter. Honor hates the Drifter, which I think is going to be mined for some dramatic tension in this expansion. We'll get to that later. But I'm guessing it's going to be like an Obi-Wan teaching situation. And then, obviously, the thing that everyone else suspected from the very beginning when we heard a Dredgen is in Seoul, a new Dredgen, is that the Dredgen is going to be a member of the Sith. It seems like they're keeping the identity and appearance of this Dredgen very close to the chest because we don't really get a good look at the Dredgen. This is the best shot in the entire ViDoc of the Dredgen, and they're basically like a silhouette. Basically can't see them, so we don't really know anything about them except for the fact that they wield a red lightsaber and they're our analog for the Sith. I think, like, narratively, it would be the most interesting if they used to be a member of the Praxic Order who went rogue. I think that would be pretty interesting. It also would kind of mirror Anakin Skywalker falling to the darkness. And now it's time to talk about the plot points that we know about for the expansion. Some of these are like estimated, like I am doing some guesswork, but some of these we know are pretty definitive. I'll tell you which ones are kind of like a guess and which ones are definitive when we get to each one. So the first one, this one is directly from the lore, but also Alison Lurs mentioned this in the ViDoc. The Imperium are manipulating time. So I'm going to read a relevant section from the lore. I am finally recovering from my fever and should be released from this damned warship soon if my tasks finish on the Cabal's schedule. The days are running into each other. This station is taking decades to design. Not that anyone will know. It'll look like days, maybe a week at most, but it's a lifetime without you in it. Despite that, the warship still feels like a maze. I've given up trying to decipher it. But this is an engineer who's working under the Imperium, potentially under threat of imprisonment. Not sure exactly what their situation is. The lore doesn't make it super clear, but we do hear about taking decades to design, but it'll look like days or a week. There's clearly some time manipulation going on. And then I'm going to play a clip from the ViDoc.
Drifter is convinced that there's a connection between the Nine and the rise of this new faction, the Barrent Imperium. He sees them rising at an unnaturally fast rate and is insistent that there's a problem. But the Vanguard isn't listening. They're insisting that he needs to stand down.
That's really interesting. So it kind of explains how we suddenly are having this like evil empire springing out of nowhere with the resources and the like appearance of controlling a large portion of Seoul suddenly without warning. And that was one thing that I was concerned about when I heard that there was going to be an evil empire in Renegades. But it seems like they're going with the strange time manipulation explanation where they're going to take control of a lot of Seoul and become very powerful very fast. I'm going to be 100 with you. I am like 99.99% sure that Drifter is right. I don't know why they would mention that if Drifter was wrong, because like it seems like almost guaranteed that the ability to manipulate time is coming from a member of the Nine. They're getting help from the Nine. This member of the Nine would then be able to devote resources to building up this Imperium decades or even centuries before Imperium starts to form. So I am wondering if this Imperium are like a set of puppets that are being kind of controlled by the Nine, and really the person who's in control is a member of the Nine, or someone who is like making deals with the Nine, perhaps the Dredgen. And they seem to be kind of trying to conceal who's really in control of the Imperium. So I think that's going to be a reveal in the expansion, probably. Hopefully they don't spoil it in a trailer. if it's an interesting like narrative plot point. But knowing Bungie's marketing, they probably will spoil it in a trailer, unfortunately. In terms of who from the Nine it could possibly be, I I think the outer orbits make a lot of sense because I do not buy the fact that the inners would have much to gain from like working with a group like the Imperium. It seems to me like we are being set up for this conflict in the Fate Saga in a way where we're kind of like allied with the inners or like pseudo allied with the inners for at least now, and the outers are seeming very malevolent and like they have some relationships with enemy factions like the Taken, Dread, and the Conductor. So I would not be surprised if they have a relationship with the Imperium. And also, the Nine have been known to do things like cause conflicts and wars that take place over entire expansions, like House of Wolves, the Red War, Forsaken. I made a whole video talking about this recently that you can watch. It'll be linked somewhere in the description if you want to. I would be very surprised if the Nine are not involved. They are almost certainly involved. The only explanation that I can think of for the Vanguard telling Drifter to stand down is that Keitel's Cabal are trying to contain the situation because the Barent Imperium is supposedly a fractured off group from them. So maybe Keitel is like, leave this Cabal business to us. But then Drifter and the Guardian are like, no, we need to intervene. This is bad. But the Vanguard is like, no, we need to preserve the alliance with Keitel, so you can't do anything right now. I'm guessing that's the explanation, but it's unclear. This next plot point, it's not from the ViDoc. It is specifically from one of the lore entries from Ash and Iron. Three's prophecy will be concealed. And I'm guessing that this is to avoid mass panic in the last city and in the population at large, because only a few people will know about Three's prophecy of extinction from the end of the Edge of Fate. From this lore, Zavala's order to conceal the prophecy may be priority 1, but with what I've learned from monitoring the Drifter and the Guardian's new scheme, I'll be taking my Cormorant Blade with me for company. So this is an entry that it's pretty much confirmed that it's from Honor. That's why I think the person in the ViDoc that we see wielding the lightsaber and fighting the Dredgen is Honor because of this entry, which is Honor speaking. But it's interesting that the Praxic Order is being basically ordered to conceal the truth from the public and prevent the prophecy from escaping. So they're doing some kind of like psyop or like containment of classified information. I'm guessing this won't be like a huge part of the expansion, but it could be something that happens in the background or in the lore. And then also the Drifter and the Guardian's new scheme, it sounds like based on the expansion, that's going to be what they're doing on Mars and in Tharsis Junction, which I will get to shortly. We have another thing from the lore, and there is this shot that I'm using for this slide that shows Drifter walking into a building, and it's got 9 symbols on it. So I'm guessing that Drifter is going to like try to commune with the 9 or talk to the 9 or like make a deal with them to figure out what's going on at the beginning of the expansion, and this might be revealed in a flashback or something. That's not really the event that I'm talking about in this slide. There is a lore entry that talks about Drifter reuniting with his ghost, who famously cannot speak and has some like body modifications, and like Drifter really does not like his ghost. I'm looking forward to the forthcoming reconnection with your ghost. Perhaps we will exchange pleasant memories about you together. Eris watches as her Drifter snorts, then picks at his food, grimacing. And then later he says, he laughs. To put it lightly, I'll be breaking bread with a damn fireball. Besides, with my track record, I wouldn't be surprised if my ghost hated me. I know I would. And then later he says, besides, maybe we all deserve a second chance. So Drifter in this entry is like having a conversation and a meal with Eris, and one of the funny details is that Drifter does not like the coleslaw. It's got too much mayo. I think that's like a expression of his nervousness about reuniting with his ghost. We don't really know why he's going to reconnect with Ghost or what the purpose is, but I'm guessing they wouldn't mention this in lore if it wasn't going to happen. And given Drifter's role in the expansion that we're going to get to shortly, I think this could be something interesting to be explored, because Drifter has recently become nine touched. He's like aged massively by dropping the Hall into the singularity at the heart of Three's corpse. He's had a big life change, and he probably like might be thinking about reconnecting with his ghost because of that. It also potentially could be because of actions in the expansion. Not sure. I'm guessing that is going to happen either off screen before the expansion or maybe early in the expansion. And then we have another event. The Imperium builds the super weapon. And this is another quote from that person, that same lore entry about the person who's being held captive and engineering the space station for the Imperium. It says, they've been building some sort of weapon while I've been working on the station. I think the two are connected somehow. I tried to inquire about it and nearly had my arm ripped off. Haven't asked about it since. You'll need to find out about that yourself. Sketches of the Cosmic Incubator. Don't let them find this, Kyung. Give this letter to Eris when you're done with it, and please stay safe. I love you. Dr. M. Simone Lee. So this seems to be an engineer of some kind who's working for the Cabal and helping them build their space station, who finds out about this super weapon that we see in the ViDoc, some concept art. It looks like it is a bunch of different laser beams combining together and firing a massive laser, which, if you know anything about Star Wars, that's how the Death Star works visually. It also looks a lot like the tower. I find that geometric resemblance kind of striking, but I'm guessing that this super weapon is like at the front of the space station, because we see the space station in one of the like cutscenes that they show clips from. I think that's what we're seeing, and I'm guessing that because this looks a lot like how the Death Star fires, that it's going to be a super weapon that has the ability to destroy planets, or perhaps a member of the Nine. That's a prediction I've talked about before. I'm guessing that's what the Imperium is doing. Perhaps they're going to try to kill 4 for some reason, because the Outers want more power for some reason, and they think that killing 4 will give them more power. Not exactly sure what they would have to gain, unless like this weapon is some kind of experiment, and like they're hoping that the weapon will be able to transmute a member of the Nine, and like free them from the bonds of soul's matter life. And they could be unwittingly testing it on 4 to see if it works. None of that is confirmed. That's all like speculation based on like Star Wars. This is where I think the expansion's actually going to start. It is the space battle that everyone predicted. It looks like the opening shot of A New Hope. We've got Mars down here. We've got Phobos and Deimos. I'm not sure which one is which in this shot. And we have Drifter's Hall. Or not his hall, his derelict. But he's missing the hall. I wonder what has happened to the hall. I suspect that the hall has been stolen by the Imperium, because they were asking about it in the lore about them mugging Zur. So this is the space station, and I think the super weapon is right here on the front of it, but I'm not 100% sure. It just looks similar, like shape-wise, to that. We see in the ViDoc that Drifter gets captured. He is frozen in ice. This is like Han Solo getting captured and frozen in carbonite in The Empire Strikes Back. And they mentioned in the ViDoc that a big part of this expansion is us trying to rescue an old friend, and that's clearly Drifter You can see its drifter in the ice. I'm guessing this is stasis that he's frozen in because, like, the Dredgen could be a darkness user or something. It just makes too much sense for it not to be stasis. Could just be ice, though, but it's probably stasis. We know that the Guardian works with the syndicates, and that's a big part of the gameplay and plot of the expansion. We're trying to gain notoriety, going to the lawless frontier, doing deals with each of the syndicates to try to build our power. And I'm guessing that this is part of the Drifter and Guardian's plan that was mentioned in that lore entry from Honor. I wouldn't be surprised if the Guardian is working with Drifter to investigate the Syndicate activity or the Barant Imperium prior to Drifter being captured, and then they have to try to get enough power to rescue Drifter by working with the Syndicates. It's probably like the main thrust of the expansion. This is a hypothetical event, but I'm like 99% sure that this is what's going to happen. The Guardian's going to go rescue Drifter in a mission at some point. And then, I believe, during the rescue attempt, we see like a docked ship. So I think that the rescue of Drifter is going to be like the analog. They're kind of remixing the rescue of Han Solo from Carbonite in Return of the Jedi, and then also rescuing Princess Leia from the Death Star in A New Hope. But I'm guessing that we're going to sneak aboard the space station under false pretenses, and then we are going to get Drifter out of there, and then at the very end, the Dredgen is going to find out and come and attack, and that's what I think is happening in that cutscene at the very end of the ViDoc, where we see this member of the Praxic Order exchange Praxic blades with the Dredgen, which is why I think it's Honor, because that entry specifically said it's Agent AUN-326, which is almost certainly Honor. That's why I think that it is a, like, master-student situation, and Honor is the expansion's version of Obi-Wan, the Jedi Master, and the Dredgen is a former student who's fallen to the dark side or the darkness. Like, pretty much everything that the Praxic Order is against. Compelling drama, I think. And then, you know what's gonna happen. The Imperium weapon is probably going to get destroyed. It's probably the climax of the expansion. It might get fired before it gets destroyed. I would guess to establish the stakes, we'll see like at least a test of it, like we saw in Star Wars with the destruction of Alderaan. Probably not going to let us destroy Mars or let the Imperium destroy Mars, but who knows? A final event. Earth starts to decay. So this is something that was mentioned by Alison Lur in the interview that she did with My Name is Bife recently, where Bife was asking about what impacts Three's death will have on Earth, and Allison shared that it will have some negative effects on Earth that will start to happen a few months after Three's death, and we're starting to get into that territory. There is this entry from Ash and Iron that seems to be from Three's perspective based on the syntax, and it is talking about the decay of Earth. So it reads, drip, 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 drip. Opened wounds infect murky soil. A vanquished corpse poisoning each leaf, and branch, and trunk, with sour taste and rotten aroma. A dead core bringing no heat. Streams and lakes with heavy waters. Impossible to swim. Nights an hour shorter. Days 2 hours longer. The decayed crops and perverse time merely widened the hole in a vengeful heart, a world cursed and sick and broken, a cure unknown. Yet they find reason to persist and keep on living on an earthly cadaver. This is like a prophecy for Earth starting to decay and like become sick, and the laws of physics start to break down, presumably because we have this corpse of a member of the Nine decaying inside of and surrounding Earth, and presumably that's doing something paracausal to the planet. We don't really know if the Nine are paracausal. or like what gives them their powers. I would love to know more about this interaction between the planet and the member of the Nine and the corpse and the member of the Nine. Hopefully, it'll get explored more in the lore and on screen, because I'm guessing this is going to be like a ticking time bomb that becomes an urgent threat that's going to cause extinction, and be one of the contributing factors to the prophecy of extinction. Like, some of this stuff is really interesting. There's a dead core bringing no heat to the planet, which implies that Earth's core will, like, suddenly die and geothermal heating will stop working. I'm not a, like, geologist or, like, a geophysicist, but that seems pretty bad. Then heavy waters, like, it's got the isotope of water that has deuterium in it, I believe. It's been a while since I did chemistry stuff. Nights an hour shorter, but days 2 hours longer. The day-night cycle is a consequence of the rotation of Earth about its axis, and we're just having Earth spin around so we can see the sun. And when we're facing away from the sun, that's when it's night. If it's daytime in one location on the Earth, that means it is nighttime on the other side of the Earth in the other hemisphere. But the problem is, if you have the day getting longer in one place, it has to get shorter somewhere else. So this might be talking about a specific location, like maybe the last city. If the days are 2 hours longer and the nights are 1 hour shorter, that would mean that Earth's rotation is slowing down, which would imply that Earth is becoming tidally locked, because now there would be 25 hours in a day because you've taken 1 hour away from night but added 2 to the day at the same time. Earth's rotation will eventually start slowing down. It's been slowing down throughout the entire history of the planet, but that's taken like 4.5 billion years. But slowing down by an entire hour per day is a lot. So that would be a pretty drastic change and pretty negatively affect the ecosystem of the planet. But then decayed crops and perverse time. The vengeful heart, I'm guessing, is supposed to be the conductor. A world cursed. That is definitely Earth. It's sick, it's broken, we don't know how to cure it. And yet they find reason to persist and keep on living. That's almost certainly humanity and the people who live on Earth, like the Elixni, trying to keep on living after the apocalypse, which is a very human thing to do. Before we end this video, I wanted to talk about the Lawless Frontier. So it is an activity, or like a series of activities. I don't know exactly how it works, but they were talking about it in the ViDoc. There are apparently different types of jobs you can take. So either you're smuggling something, you're sabotaging something, or you're like hunting down someone specific. And they mentioned that you can work for each of the different syndicate factions and like curry favor with them. So I'm guessing there's going to be some kind of like faction rep system, maybe one of those activities, kind of like the Nether, like maybe a like overthrow, where there's a bunch of different things that you can do in the activity, but it's probably going to be like restricted to each iteration for like job type. You're doing that specific thing. And then I'm guessing that there is a map on each of the 3 destinations for the expansion. They didn't mention if like there are patrol zones for each of them, or if there's not. I would be pretty disappointed if there's not and it's just like missions on all of them. I could also see it being like there is a patrol zone on Mars and then there's just missions on the other planets. But I would love a Venus patrol zone of some kind, so would love to see that happen. I'm kind of sad that we're getting all of these activities in different locations, but there's no patrol. Granted, I don't spend a ton of time in patrol, but I do like to go in patrol and just kind of like zoom around on a sparrow and like kind of see the sights and like find cool screenshots from patrol. And that's something you can't really do in these activities like the Nether or like Ash and Iron's activity. that is the plague lands, but it's not a patrol zone. Like, I would love patrol zone instances of these expansions, please. Thank you. As part of this, there are destination abilities that you can choose to bring into each of these like contracts that you're doing. There are 9 of them. They mentioned a bunch of them. It seems like there's 2 vehicles. One of them was the like walker type thing, and one of them was like a modified sparrow type thing. I think they mentioned like airstrikes and turrets and stuff, which is probably what some of these are. It reminds me a lot of the like upgrade abilities in Onslaught. They seem to be very like weapon and vehicle focused, so not like a magical paracausal ability. At the very end, they mentioned that there is a invasion ability in the Lawless Frontier, which it seems like you are going to be like having the ability to infiltrate and like race against other people doing conflicting contracts with you. So I find that really interesting because it seems like a new take on Gambit. They did mention that invasion is optional, but that I think you'll get more rewards if you play the version with invasion. So I'm really interested to see how that kind of innovation and like bringing Gambit back in Renegades goes. I think it has a lot of potential. It could be very annoying and like kind of a very stale meta like Gambit has, but I'm really interested to see some like innovation in this PvE space for Destiny. Gambit has kind of been languishing for years, and they did mention that they're going to be doing some updates to Gambit in Renegades, and given the fact that the whole expansion seems like it's going to be a quest to rescue Drifter frozen in stasis being our MacGuffin of the expansion, I'm guessing that there's going to be Gambit stuff, and it feels like thematically fitting. So that is everything I have for my slideshow and this video. I'm curious to hear what you think of everything that was revealed in the expansion. I'm feeling cautiously optimistic story-wise. I was initially pretty cynical about the inclusion of Star Wars and kind of worried that it would feel forced or trite. It seems like it'll be interesting, and now that we know more about the story, I feel better about it and am a bit more excited now that we've seen the ViDoc. But I totally understand if you're like, I don't want Star Wars in my Destiny. I'd rather it just be Destiny. I think that's a pretty like valid thing. Corporate crossovers are annoying. Stuff like this tends to be just like a cynical move for money. It seems like Bungie is pretty passionate about Star Wars. I mean, like, they're making sci-fi media. Pretty much everyone who works in sci-fi media is going to have some kind of obsession with either Star Wars or Star Trek. It's kind of unavoidable. I'm intrigued. I feel like now that we know more, I'm more excited, and feeling cautiously optimistic, but there is still a possibility that they screw this up and the Star Wars stuff feels too forced and detracts from the story too much. But after the Edge of Fate and after this ViDoc reveal, I'm feeling pretty good about it, but I'm curious to see what you think about it. Are you super excited because you love Star Wars and you love Destiny and you want to see the two combined? Or are you one of those people that are like, no, get this Star Wars out of my Destiny? I'm kind of on the fence at this point, but like, I just want to see how it plays out in the expansion. But I'm curious to see what you have to say about it now that we know a lot about this story. And I'm also curious to hear about what you think of this format, this like off the cuff PowerPoint presentation video style. It's not something I'd done before, but I wanted to try something new. Thank you for watching. Thank you to the channel members for supporting my videos, and I will see you in the next video.